Hey guys, Dartix here. Recently, a ton of journalists and influencers got to play Veilguard in person, and the general sentiment around the game is pleasant surprise, that you need to have it in your hands to truly experience it. IGN recently had the privilege of talking about their experiences first after getting to try out the character creator, the introductory quest, a faction mission, and a companion quest a little deeper into the game. So let's break down everything you need to know, as well as check out some new footage. IGN says, but what impressed me after the first few hours was how much exploration can still be done in the various regions, as well as the impact the player character, Rook, can have on those regions. Consider it something of a mix of Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition, the more streamlined approach of the former with the rich, geographically and socio-politically diverse world of the latter. This confirms that yes, there will be major branching decisions that will impact the world. Do you save one faction or another kind of choice, which will then reflect on the region itself? I like the idea of an expanded, streamlined approach of 2 with the richness of Inquisition because that's what those did well. Dragon Age 2 felt a bit rushed in its content, where Inquisition felt a bit bloated in its effort to be expansive. We also see a conversation with a Canary Rook and Lucanus, a float option. I admire your courage.
I admire you.
We also see that you can request more detail at the bottom, which is different from the usual detail in the middle left. IGN goes on to say, of course, some of the bigger art style, combat, and gameplay changes will be subject to personal taste, but after my time with Dragon Age the Veilguard, I left feeling like these 10 long years might have just been worth the wait. I completely agree when it comes to the art style. I very much dislike the direction. The environments look gorgeous at times, but the character models, I don't know. In a lot of angles and in most situations, they just don't look right to me. There's a lot of clutter you can remove from the UI, so that won't be a problem. But I agree with a lot of you in that the choice of art style isn't my favorite in the series. However, that's not why we play Dragon Age. And after hearing a lot of people saying they enjoyed their time with the game, I'm even more hopeful, even for the combat, which some have already dismissed. Though if you really want to experience games in all their glory, I'm celebrating being close to 250,000 subscribers by giving away a ton of prizes, including a 4090, consoles, games, and more. So enter at the Gleam link below and keep an eye out during this video for a purple code word. Alright, back to it. IGN says, I largely played mage and rogue builds during my hands-on time, and I also quickly started to lean on certain companions' abilities. For one, the mage healing ability was essential. For one particularly difficult revenant, I basically established a pattern where I was only using Balara's mana to heal me, dodging and playing it safe when it got too risky. Nev's ability to slow time was also one I kept returning to, offering a bit more control on the battlefield when the situation got fast-paced. As for glass cannon builds, you'll want to have a warrior around to taunt your enemies out of your way. Now, take this with a grain of salt. What we've learned from IGN videos in the past is they generally love games but aren't so good at them, sorry to say, at least when they're previewing. We might equate this to them focusing on absorbing the information around them rather than getting the best results. It's not easy to perform with the cameras on after all. But I very much doubt that Balara's heal is essential, so don't think you absolutely need a healer on your squad. It just may make some fights safer having a healer and or tank, though the devs have mentioned multiple times you won't need either and can build the way you want. IGN also says they use Balara's mana to heal, when she doesn't use mana to heal. Instead, she uses a cooldown. So immediately you can question if they were playing correctly because they could have been using other spells as well. IGN continues, but combat aside, your dialogue choices, your Rook's background tied to one of 6 factions you can choose, and the consistent decisions you make are immediately important, which shouldn't be too surprising for fans of Bioware games. The dialogue wheel is back, of course, as is the approval-disapproval system, but I was surprised to see that the Veilguard actually expands on the consequences of some of your dialogue choices in very clear terms. It's a variation of the so and so will remember that system, but more specific. Take, for example, my first confrontation with Solus. I chose a more sarcastic, humorous approach with him, and at the end of our confrontation, text on the side of the screen informed me that I have traded verbal jabs with Solus. It was far from the only occurrence of this sort of text, and leaves me curious as to how your relationship with various characters will build and branch out over time based on your attitude. We expected Bioware to include the typical approval and disapproval system in games, but what is refreshing is seeing that with Solus, it's more specific than just like or dislike. Trading verbal jabs being recorded means that perhaps he'll bring something up next time you don't take him as seriously, or even trade jabs back with you and start to pull the stick out of his bottom. In the footage, you also talk to Varric and he notices that you like action more than words based on your response, meaning that with non-companion characters, there may be more drastic changes in how they respond to you in the future. We can see if we pause a very clear choice between what Nev says and what Harding says. In these cases, it's obvious who will approve and disapprove, but it's not going to be this black and white most of the time. Then we have the obvious flirt options represented, so you don't accidentally lead someone on. IGN says, speaking of consequences, it quickly became clear to me that there would consistently be tons of choices in the Veilguard that will have lasting results. It probably seems like I'm stating the obvious here, but I get a sense that even more of these kinds of choices might be peppered throughout than the usual Bioware game. Right at the beginning, for instance, I made a decision that led to Harding getting injured. She remained bruised up for the remainder of the next couple of hours. I felt like a real jerk about it, and that was probably the point. Dragon Age the Veilguard seemed to be telling me right from the start that I'm gonna feel like a jerk a lot. Without spoiling too much, you'll be able to see your progression and choices in the environment around you as well. So this leads me to believe that Harding's face will get better. Whew. Many were worried that someone hurt her and she stays like that the whole game, but thankfully she's just injured because you let a pillar drop on her. This means that if you choose Nev instead of Harding, Nev will be damaged because of your actions. So, are you Team Nev or Team Harding? Bioware have focused on the story in this game, and that does mean that choices won't be black and white. It might be a case of the ethical trolley problem, except pulling the lever kills different people or levels the town, for example. IGN says, as mentioned earlier, one of my biggest worries was that the Veilguard could end up being more linear in its approach, trading branching gameplay for a straight line, and sure, the opening hours, essentially the tutorial zone, are a little railroady save for a couple of key decisions you have to make, but once you're past that and more established within Act 1, you're much more free to tackle quests as you please as you unlock more and more regions. You do this via the Crossroads. For those who aren't brushed up on their Dragon Age lore, it's a nexus between the waking world of Thedas and the metaphysical realm of the Fade, through which the ancient elves will travel through magical mirrors called Alluvians. Now you can use the Alluvians for the same purpose, and to unlock new regions, you have to fight through certain areas of the Crossroads before you can start fast traveling to them. Unlocking said regions opens up a vast network of areas, and not unlike past Dragon Age games, they're dramatically different from one another. Take for example the Alathan Forest, a gorgeous, colourful region whose aesthetics mix greenery with elven magic. You can see nugs burrowing into the grass, magical artifacts abound, and there's a vast variety of nature to simply admire. You're hit with a massive tone shift when you head to Hosberg, currently under siege by the Blight. Here is where you'll see some of the more horror-inspired aesthetics and, frankly, some of the grosser aspects of the Blight. While the Veilguard's tone certainly leans more high fantasy in places like the Crossroads, don't worry, those who miss the gore and dark fantasy of Origins will find that too in places where the Blight has spread. But I couldn't help spend a lot of my time just running about in Traverso, the bustling city that's home to the Antivan Crows faction. For one thing, a lively city feels like a novelty in Dragon Age, but there was simply so much to explore that I kept getting sidetracked. A merchant with unique items here, a new quest to pick up over there, a random combat encounter here. And that's when I wasn't looking around for a cat or dog to pet, because yes, you can pet the cats and dogs. So like we expect in Dragon Age titles spanning all the way back to Origins, you can use a method to travel between different areas of the world, and those areas are different to each other in a drastic way because they don't need to be connected in one big open world. I much prefer this over the saturation of open world games these days, and I found myself craving the handcrafted curation of Bioware games of old. Thankfully, Bioware realized this and give us a huge adventure with less of the tedium, though it does seem like the Crossroads will house a lot of secrets and exploration. They go on to say each companion has an environmental ability, some of which came in handy for me. In my time in the Alathan Forest, I frequently called upon Balara, whose environmental ability allows her to tinker with magical artifacts. It's a nice quality of life addition. Your companions don't even need to be in your party in order for you to use these abilities. As an aside, another one of my favorite quality of life additions is the fact that party banter pauses and picks up again later if you trigger combat, a cutscene, or anything that would interrupt their dialogue. That's right, no more awkward standing around in order to hear the complete conversation. This was one of my complaints with Andromeda, and in my 2024 parody review of the game, I point out and give examples on how hallways were never long enough for you to walk down and finish the conversation you were having with a party member, meaning that you would have to stop or risk it cutting off and you missing the conversation completely. Thankfully, like we've seen in God of War, banter and world conversations will stop, but continue after the interruption has passed. Also, do note that each companion will have their own environmental ability, just like they mentioned with Balara, but you can learn how to use them yourself using a special dagger. IGN continues, if you're feeling overwhelmed, the difficulty and accessibility options do allow for about just as much or as little handholding as you need. For example, with one Antivan Crow's quest I was doing, I could turn the navigation on and simply follow the game's guidance, or turn it off and look for clues in the environments to follow. In this case, the crow's purple symbol painted on certain walls. I also just happened to be playing an Antivan Crow Rook while completing this quest, which led to some fun dialogue options. I'm not a huge fan of options that bypass game's mechanics. If you're meant to look around for clues, I don't want the game to let anyone turn off the need to search. I understand it's to help some people, but at that point, they're no longer really playing the game. Though, who am I to judge? What is good though is that the backgrounds clearly play a part in dialogue options. In regards to addressing Inquisition's crazy, bloated hinterland section of the game, which had over 50 side quests, most of them unimportant, IGN says, the Veilguard has boiled this down quite a lot. You're still free to explore, but the scope isn't nearly as dizzying and the quests point back to the main story, a region or faction, or a companion. Another clear reaction to criticisms of Inquisition are our villains in Veilguard. The two elven gods feel much more present throughout the events of the early game than Corypheus, the frankly lackluster baddie of Inquisition. Frankly, Corypheus was a terrible villain. Solus was actually the true villain, but you needed to have the DLC to really see that, and the game could have done a better job creating tension there. However, it's good to see that the Veilguard knows that a great antagonist, or antagonists in this case, make a good story. IGN go on to say, the lighthouse will be likely the most important location of the Veilguard, serving as a hub for you and your companions. Each one of your companions has their own room, and conveniently, a light shines outside the door when they have a cutscene available. Once you get further into Act 1, it certainly starts to feel more lived in, and you can discover some pretty charming character quirks. For example, I found that Manfred, Emmerich's skeletal assistant, enjoys spending time on the balcony, and I even got a few games of rock, paper, scissors in with him. So if you ever wanted to play rock, paper, scissors with a skeleton Matt Mercer, you can. I like the idea that cutscenes you won't want to miss are highlighted, meaning that those who don't obsessively check in on companions after every little activity like I do, won't miss major content unless they want to. Though flavor-wise, it's like hitting the stewardess light on a flight. It's a bit odd for a companion to do if they want attention. I would have preferred them to approach you in some way when you next enter the lighthouse. I digress. IGN continues, but I found the lighthouse somewhat symbolic of the biggest challenges this game is facing, bringing in new players while honoring the now incredibly vast lore that Dragon Age has built across the games, comic books, short stories, and more. Basically, if you were worried that the name change from Dragon Age Dreadwolf meant less Solus, think again. His history, along with the history of the Alluvians, are baked into the lighthouse, and you learn more and more about the threat you face as you unlock Solus's murals with various wolf statues. You even get to see some of his memories firsthand. As a lore nerd, I very much appreciated this, as well as the other various callbacks to the series' history. The Origin fans will likely love the Grey Warden heavy quest, and we already know the Inquisitor, the protagonist from Dragon Age Inquisition, and Select Your World states in the character creator. But I do wonder if it'll overwhelm new players, which Bioware seems to be courting with its action-heavy combat system. That's why it helps, at least, to have something of an outsider like Rook to take the helm of the Veilguard. Plus, the scrappiness of Rook remind me a bit of playing as Hawk in Dragon Age 2, rather than the more Chosen One-esque protagonist of the Warden in Origins and the Inquisitor in Inquisition. So, for those who are afraid that Veilguard would forget everything Dragon Age was, that doesn't seem to be the case here. I believe Bioware games succeed because their formula lets you play out a Chosen One fantasy. Hawk, though not initially special, becomes special later on. Rook no doubt will follow a similar path, though I'm left wondering what his special MacGuffin will be, besides of course having Solar Silverhand in his head. So that's everything. What do you think? More or less excited? Let me know below. If I missed anything, I'd love to hear it as well. Be sure to enter the competition, and for everything Veilguard and RPG, you're in the right place. Ciao friends.